Greg McElroy on his Cole and Greg show that happens on Jocks here in Birmingham said that he had heard from what he felt was a credible source that Nick Saban may get back into coaching. And it stirred up a lot of Alabama discussions on the first days of SEC Media Days. And there have been a lot of discussions around it, and I just want to kind of give my 2 cents. I've digested a lot of the information. I've listened to some of the interviews. I know Nick Kelly had like Chris Lowe and Damian Harris and a few others on. Different people have kind of talked about it throughout the day. Nick Saban, as of this moment, has not weighed in on those comments. Lane Kiffin even obviously made some jokes about it. But, these comments have kind of been spreading around wildfire, which is kind of funny that SEC Media Day starts and Alabama's not supposed to be a topic of discussion, and then they are kind of the big story that comes out of SEC Media Days the first day. It's a little funny how that happened. I don't think that was intentional by Greg, but that is what happened. And the question then becomes, do you think Nick Saban would come back to coaching? And my answer is simply no. Not at the college level. Not at the head coaching level in college. Right? So I specified what I mean by that. I don't think that Nick Saban would come back to coach in college as a head coach. Now, could I see him come back into a non-head coaching role in college? Not really. I think that he's probably enjoying his time off and the things that he does surrounding college football, albeit game day or the things like that he does. My expectation is, especially with Corso stepping down after the first college game day this season, Nick Saban is going to slide perfectly into that role. Obviously, he did that last season, but he's going to be kind of that figurehead of college game day now, kind of moving forward. So my expectation is no. My expectation is that he is not going to be coaching. But as Chris Lowe said with Nick Kelly, I don't think it's his decision. I think it's Miss Terry's decision. If you listened or heard any of or listened or read or any of the things that came out when Nick Saban retired, there was a lot of discussions, and one of the things that came out was part of the reason he retired was there was a discussion where Miss Terry had said a lot of these players, when they were doing recruiting, something she really liked was building relationships with people. And a lot of the discussions moved from what can you do for us as a program to what are you going to do for us monetarily. And it really shifted away from what college athletics in her mind was intended to be, right? It was the thing that they loved about college that they didn't get in the pros, right? In college, you were able to build a relationship with the family and you were able to build a relationship with the player and then turn them into solid young people throughout the course of their career and throughout the course of their life. And so that was the big thing that Miss Terry said, that why Nick Saban got back into coaching in college, the thing that she liked about it, the thing that he liked about it, you were able to mold young men. It's the reason why he takes such an emphasis on not every mistake someone makes is going to be the end of their career, is going to be the end of their football career. Maybe, he knows something about a player that someone else doesn't, or maybe, there's a whole litany of things that he kind of has talked about. He's talked at length about this, whether it be with the media, whether it be in press conferences. This is a topic that he feels very passionately about. And so because of all of these things, my expectation personally is there's no chance Nick Saban comes back to coach in college because of the current landscape as it relates to revenue sharing and NIL. Do I, however, think that Nick Saban could still be successful if he was still in college? Of course. I think that Nick Saban would have, like any other thing, I think he would have adjusted. I think that he would have, if Nick Saban was not 74, 76 right now, he would have hired a guy like Courtney Morgan. If Nick Saban's in his early 60s or, even 50s, I think he hires a guy like Courtney Morgan and he continues building the program and he has someone else deal with the finances. And Nick Saban clearly puts it as, I'm not in charge of the money. Don't come to me. Once you want to play for the University of Alabama, I'm your guy. And obviously I'm going to be there in the recruiting standpoint, but the money has nothing to do with me. We have a GM that handles all that. That's what my gut says Nick Saban would do if he was, to be back in coaching. Do I think he could be successful? Absolutely. But I just don't think that's something he's interested in with the current landscape of college football. Now, personally, my thought of what he would do in a landscape of college football is he would potentially be a commissioner of college football overall and help, set certain rules and regulations as it relates to whether it be the SEC and Big Ten, that if they have some type of mega conference, whether this becomes some NCAA offshoot that relates to college football, right? Like, I'm not sure what the revenue sharing and everything is going to end up being, right? Like, this is just the infancy of this because it just got passed. But the real question is, what is it long term? I think that Nick Saban would be incredible for something like that. I think that Nick Saban would be incredible to be able to be the guy that's in charge of that because I think he cares enough about the players and knows enough about, from the coaching perspective and from the administrative perspective, that he could absolutely do that. I know the guys at Solid Verbal have talked about that. A lot of people have talked at length hey, Nick Saban would be the perfect guy for this. I 100% agree with that. That's what my current thought process is. He stays in game day. He does the things that he does from a media perspective. He's able to study his film, whether he does draft coverage or whatever. He studies his film as if he was, coaching, and he can use that in college game day. He can use that in NFL draft coverage. He can use that in, championship game coverage, that type of stuff. And then Nick Saban potentially moves into more of a commissioner type role. However, if you were to say Nick Saban comes back into coaching tomorrow, in my mind, it's in some way, shape, form the NFL. Now, do I think that he would do it? No. But I personally think that there was a semi-sour taste left in his mouth with how poorly things went with the Dolphins, and with a standpoint of Nick Saban is looked at as a failure at the Dolphins. He went 500, or, a game over 500, game below 500. He was around 500. In college, that's abysmal. In the NFL, that's fine, right? Like, that's not super poor, not great, but it's not terrible, right? He was only there a couple of seasons. Very famously, he wanted Drew Brees. There are plenty of, he clearly had the chops to know what he was wanting. And part of the big thing that he had an issue with was inability to potentially build his roster how he wanted it, or inability to kind of shape people how he wanted it. Now, do I think that Nick Saban potentially, and like I said, I still don't think that this is likely, but do I still think that if he was to come back, he would potentially go back into an NFL sense to try to prove, hey, that he can still do it? I think that's the only answer, right? My personal opinion, and, the opinion of people that I respect, and, for example, like Chris Lowe, I know Nick Kelly specifically talked to him. Chris Lowe of ESPN, he's who broke the official story when Nick Saban did retire. He knows him as well as anyone in the country outside of Miss Terry and his family. Chris Lowe said he doesn't think Nick Saban comes back, right? And I think that I'm personally of that mindset, right? I'm personally of the mindset that Nick Saban didn't make a rash decision. I think that they had discussions, and even though to a lot of people it seemed like a sudden decision because he worked up until the day he retired, I think that is the person who Nick Saban is. He's not going to start slacking off because he thinks he's going to retire. He is going to give it 100% until the minute he calls it quits. Then the minute he calls it quits, then he can obviously, clean out his office and move on for the day. But up until that minute that he says, okay, I'm done, he's going to work. And that's what he did, right? He, interviewed wide receivers coaches, and he interviewed different people the day that he retired. And I think that's just because that's the personality of Nick Saban. I think some people point to that as he made a rushed decision, and I personally don't believe that was the case. Now, is there a world in which maybe he, wishes he had took a little longer to make that decision or something? Sure, that's a possibility. I'm not Nick Saban. I don't know the answer to that question, but sure, that's a real possibility. But I'm just personally, and like I said, I'm not to discredit anyone that Greg McElroy knows, but I'm personally do not believe that Nick Saban is planning to get back into coaching. I would expect that we probably hear something from Nick himself here in the next couple of days, discrediting this. And, that's kind of where I sit when we look at this. I think that Nick Saban, understands that his legacy is, going to be what it's going to be. He knows that he has been as successful as anyone in the college rank. He has the most national titles of anyone. He has, the field named after him in Alabama. Like, he is a legend in the college ranks. In no way, shape, form, or fashion is he going back into college. Do I think he can still do it? Of course. But I do not in any way, shape, form, or fashion believe that he coaches in college again. Does he potentially help out, with, Alabama in an increased role or something? Maybe. Again, I don't think so. I think that he prefers the media sense and prefers being able to let a coach, DeBoer do what he does. I think that that's the role that Saban prefers to be in, the role he's in today. But I understand where the kind of thought process comes from. Like I said, this is something that I was not planning to discuss. I was not planning to have an episode, but I felt like it was absolutely important to have one. Couple of more things I really want to just